Good morning on this Thursday morning. I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion. You're looking back. We always look back so that we can learn a little something from what happened yesterday to set up something for today. So if I do look back, yesterday kind of eased back a little bit after having a really nice run for multiple sessions in a row to the upside. Well, you eventually are going to have some sort of a pause, maybe a pullback. That's exactly what we saw yesterday. Started down triple digits, both for the NASDAQ and for the Dow. NASDAQ recovered a little bit, not quite as much. Actually, the Dow actually recovered pretty nicely. And then second half of the day, everything changed. The acceleration to the downside continued, and then we were off. So we finished down 450 points for the Dow. Pretty significant number, actually. Lost 110 points. Just remember that, 110 points in the final 15 minutes of the day. Similarly, you look over at what was going on with the NASDAQ. It was down already. It got another 70 points in the last 15 minutes to finish down 186 points on the day. So that last parts of the day that we talk about all the time, it could be 15 minutes, it could be an hour. Sometimes it's the entire second half, whatever. Yesterday, it was that 15-minute window where we really did see that acceleration to the downside. So we had some nice volume, about 39 million yesterday in terms of the options. What traded over a million contracts? Actually, well over a million contracts yesterday. Apple traded about 2 million contracts. And I did point out yesterday with Scott on the Overtime Show on CNBC, 4 o'clock Eastern, I did point out to him, it was interesting, I thought, that Apple actually held on to some of the gains, most of the gains, finished the day up 1% when you look over at the NASDAQ with that push to the downside. So that did stand out for me a little bit. Tesla had almost 1.9 million contracts. Apple was 2 million contracts. And, oh, by the way, they aren't done yet. AMC, which has been banging around a lot lately, that traded 1.5 million contracts as well. We had crude trading anywhere, call it 113 to 114 yesterday. It had a nice move out of the 10-year. 10-year actually ticked up to that 2.4, did back off a little bit. I think we closed somewhere a little bit closer to 2.29 yesterday. And volatility. Interesting. Volatility really did stay down in a very constricted range and stayed in the 23s, actually finished the day about 23 and a half. So it kind of shows you a little bit about what was going on within the markets, not nearly as volatile. We did have that little acceleration to the end, but we did hit lows that were in the 22s. We were 22.60 on the lows. Says a lot about the day and where volatility is right now. We're not getting the same kind of intraday moves as we were getting. We did get that solid move to the downside, but not as much of that intraday bouncing around, not nearly as much as what we had been seeing when we had volatility staying above 30 and even spiking as high as 37. So energy yesterday started off pretty strong, finished pretty strong, not quite as strong as it was in the early parts of the session, but finished pretty good. Technology, not so good. It actually doubled from where it was, down about 0.75%, down about 1.5%. Then you look over at the financials, they got beat up pretty good yesterday as well, down 1.75% and 2.5% for the semiconductors. Really does explain a lot about what was going on specifically with the NASDAQ itself. So beta energy, that was a strong point. We talked about energy just a second ago being pretty strong and held on to most of the gains. It was pretty strong yesterday. Those beta names having a really nice day. Once again, you look at Marathon Oil, Baker Hughes, you look at Hess, Diamondback, all of those names having a really nice day. As I pointed out, Apple too did stand out for me, being up 1% when you look over at the percentage loss of the NASDAQ, and throw in Tesla and throw in DocuSign and, Chevron with the energy side of things, all pretty good. After the close yesterday, we did have earnings from KBH. Going into that, we were already seeing some negatives, just pulling down and getting a lot closer to 52-week lows for many of the names in the housing industry. And they disappointed. Stock was down again last night, still down a little bit today. I think it's a little bit better right now than it was last night, but their numbers weren't great. Their outlook wasn't great, and that's not a great environment for us to get some big buyers coming in there, although I have my own opinions on where those housing stocks are probably going to be headed. But for right now, things not looking as great. Spotify with a little bit of a deal with Google. That certainly got a nice little boost to the upside. So we did have some weakness in a lot of areas. Adobe, one of those areas. That's another one of those earnings plays. It's interesting. We start off with earnings season. We kind of start to lay off a little bit because it does slow down. But there are still plenty of names out there, KBH, Adobe, all these names with earnings. So Centene yesterday, a little bit to the downside as well. I look over at a DR Horton going into those earnings from KBH. Their earnings for DR aren't until April. But I look over at Micron, I look at Marvell, I look at a lot of these names in the semiconductor space that were leading sort of to the downside. Home Depot has had a few days where it's been hit pretty hard as well. And not everything in tech is great. We talked about how tech was falling off, but Apple actually hung in there. You look at Cisco, you look at Salesforce, some of those names were definitely getting hit to the downside. So we come into today with a little bit of a rally, a little bit of a bounce. We were up about 150 on the Dow, up almost 100 points on the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ over that period, since we got into the pre-markets and actually into the opening bell, just kind of steadily selling off. Last I looked, could be changed now, things change very fast. Last I looked, it was down about 15 points while the Dow was really holding on to most of its gains. It popped a little bit higher, but it was still up about 140 points before I came on. So holding on to some of those gains, but looking at the NASDAQ, a little bit of pressure there. Gold has had a nice move over the last few days. It was down a lot closer. 1900, I think 1911 is where it sort of bottomed recently, and it's back up and above. I think last I looked, it was trading about 1959. So pretty nice little bounce that we're seeing out of gold. You've got crude holding, not bouncing, but holding around that 113, 114 level after being last Wednesday at 94.95. That's pretty impressive. 10-year sitting there right around 237. And then I look at volatility. Still hanging around these 23s, just sort of waiting. And I think a lot of us, as a matter of fact, are in that position where we are probably waiting on the next shoe or what's going to happen next. You got Kashkari from Minneapolis talking about 7 quarter-point rate hikes for this year. That's certainly something that woke up the markets a little bit. You look at those jobless numbers, they were the lowest they've been in over 50 plus years. That was something that was somewhat market moving, I think, at least early on. But I look over materials having a really good start to the day. It was already up in the early parts, and in just a few moments ago when I last looked, it had doubled. It was up well over 1%. Energy's been kind of shifting back and forth, so that started off pretty strong, was starting to get a little bit of a hit. Technology hanging in there. Semiconductors had a pretty nice rise. They were up over 1% early on, but what's really pulling on the NASDAQ then? Well, you look over at some of the consumer discretionary names. I look at Tesla, started off strong. It started to pull back. Amazon pulling back almost immediately. And you look at that, they're about 36% of the XLY consumer discretionary. So that does show you a little bit about what's going on and what's sort of pulling things around. Actually, Apple was trading pretty nice again today into positive territory, pulled back a little bit, and then started to rise once again. So you have some strength from Intel. You also have some option activity there, but we're not going to talk about that now. NVIDIA, you've got AMD, all of that having a pretty good start to the day. I mentioned materials, Freeport, Nucor, Mosaic, all of those having a pretty nice start today. Those electric vehicles did start off very nice, Tesla and Lucid and some of those names. But there's a little weakness with cruise ships. Those housing names, as I mentioned, they're getting hit a little bit today. And those Chinese names taking a little bit of a break after this incredible and enormous move to the upside. But JD, PDD, NetEase, all of them pulling back just a little bit today. So I've got 2 unusuals now. I will be joining the halftime report today, but not for the whole show. I will be there for 2 more unusuals, maybe 3. We'll see what they do. but there's a lot going on already where our screens are lighting up, seeing a lot of different areas of the market too. It's a broad move. It's not just one. If there is just one that I would say did sort of stand out so far early on, energy, oil, once again. So I'm going to start off with CF Industries. We're going to ag. Trading right around 105 early on. We had a buyer of 8,100. Now, this is unusual because of the fact that they're going out to May. This isn't April. This is going out to May. They're buying a lot more time. These May 115 calls going for about $5.30. They also did hedge these calls by selling the May 130 calls against the May 115 calls are the ones they're buying, selling the other. So capping out some of the upside potential that might be there. But 7,000 of those 8,100 were all in one single print. So that says a little something about the conviction of somebody very large with a lot of capital that decided to make this, to put in this position for CF. Next, I'm going to go to energy again, but I'm going to uranium. Next Gen Energy, NXE. This is a name that we talk about a little bit more of late because uranium names have been extremely hot. They've been running. CCJ has been flying. And you look at a lot of these various names in the uranium space, there are plenty of them. There's a good solid 8 or 9 of it hitting on our systems over the last couple of weeks. Next Gen has hit before. It's hitting again. Stock trading about 580. We had 6,800 of the May 7 calls bought. Those are about 45 cents. It's kind of a stock that when it moves, it does move in chunks, but we'll have to see if it's able to get up there. 580, it's got to get somewhere close to 7 or getting even above 7 over this time frame. If it moves quickly, though, these options will move quickly as well. Theta is a very important part to the whole pricing model of what goes on with these. So very interesting. Next Gen, I like that one. CF, I also like that one. Be talking about a few others that will be that we're seeing now, or maybe even a little bit closer to the time of the halftime report. We'll see. Have a great day of trading.